Well, the latest edition on Unpluggered debuted for the club as a teenager back in 1986. It was tough times for the Saints, but he flourished in the back end of the 80s and was a key part of St Kilda's finals run in 1992 in particular. And after a decade in the game, he was a part of what was unfortunately Fitzroy's final year in the AFL. 88 games in all at AFL level. I speak of Mick Dwyer. Thanks very much for jumping on.
No problem, Darren.
Now, you arrived at the club during what most people would appreciate was a pretty dark period. I think in your first year, St Kilda won their fourth consecutive wooden spoon. Can you sort of take us through your arrival coming from the southeast of Melbourne down near Dandenong at a place called Lindale and obviously your first impressions, I think, with Graham Jelly as coach?
He would have been, yeah. So I was zoned to North Melbourne back at the time in the old zone days, pre-draft. And I was playing under 16s for Lindale. And ironically, I used to play against at club level and school level against Sean Mullane, who was Darren's younger brother. And at the time, Darren was actually trying to get to St Kilda. And there was the incident with Silvio Ficini and Paul Morwood crossing over from Sydney, South Melbourne and playing at St Kilda. Darren was zoned to South Melbourne, and I think back in the day, South Melbourne had told Darren that he could deal with any other club but St Kilda. And so Bob Mullane, Darren and Sean's father, who's no longer with us, we were playing Kimura, which is where Sean went to school, in a school game, year 10, I think we were. I was in year 10. And so the St Kilda people, probably maybe Ian Drake or Johnny Beveridge, I'm not sure, come along and watch the game, and it all started from there. But I was too young at the time, and just going about my business at my local club and playing with mates and whatever. So the day I turned 15 and a half, I think was the age back then, and Stewie Trott and Johnny Beveridge knocked at my door at about 7:30 in the morning the day I turned 15 and a half. And look, they'd been really good. I didn't really consider the fact that they were struggling at the time. I probably didn't even think much beyond playing under 19 footy, to be honest. And that's how it all started. So I played 2 games, I think, in the 19s. When the club I was at, we played some bottom teams, and I went and played 2 games. And then they sort of asked me, would I be prepared to go and play I think I ended up playing 9, I think, with the under-19s that year. And that's sort of how I ended up at St Kilda, much to the anger of my father, who was a Fitzroy supporter, and Arthur Wilson from Fitzroy got on the phone a few times, and there was a bit of backward and forward going on there. And yeah, look, we were a battling club back then, but I didn't know any better. So I was just enjoying myself with some really good mates who I met from Ballarat and other areas, and that's how it sort of all started out.
It's funny that you mentioned Stewart Trott, because we actually had him on the show last week, and told us one of the stories of how he discovered Nicky Winmar over in Perth, which was great. But what was the messaging that Stewart Trott and Ian Drake and Johnny Beveridge and those guys kind of sold you on? Because like Parko said, the club was really battling at that stage, and question marks about whether the club even survives, past a few more years and all that sort of stuff. But what was it that they sold you on about getting you down to Moorabbin at that point?
Nick, I'll be honest with you, mate, I was 15. So, it didn't take much. I was a football nut. I barracked for Fitzroy as a kid. I would study every team when it came out on a Thursday night. I lived and breathed footy. So it could have been anyone, really. They didn't preach anything. From memory, they didn't preach anything that was over the top. It was just an opportunity, and pretty much they probably had me when they walked in the door when I 7:30 in the morning the day I turned 15 and a half. So I was a pretty easy sell, to be honest.
So just get there quite young. Is there any of the big names, say Plugger or Barks or someone like that pulled you aside at any point and said, "Look, this is how we do it. This is what we're expecting from you. If you want a game, this is what you need to do," sort of thing?
Do you think Plugger's pulled too many blokes aside and told them this is the way we do things? No. No, look, back then I didn't have a great deal of exposure in that first year to many of the senior players. I played 9 games in the 19s. We made a late run for the finals from memory. I think we played Hawthorn in an elimination final in that first year. And, you know, again, mate, I'm 15 and I'm playing under 19 footy and we're playing at Waverley. In a way, and I lived in that area, so in a way, I'm already living the dream, to be honest. It wasn't until the following year that I started to have a little bit more contact with the senior group, and you're probably not surprised. I mean, the main protagonist for me was Jeff Cunningham. I mean, he was welcoming. He was he's playing state footy. So you already knew a bit about him as a player, and he was probably the first of the senior guys that and the most welcoming, I guess, at the time.
Obviously, 87 Bulldog takes over as coach. You only played a couple of games. I guess a two-part question. I should know the answer to the first part, so apologies that I don't. Did you play in the 87 reserves grand final against Carlton when we got rolled there? Before they ended up winning the senior flag. And then obviously 88 was a bit of a breakout year for you. You came in, played 15 games in a row towards the end of the year and averaged about 26 touches towards the end of the year. So I guess you turned, I think, 20 that year. So was it just a case of maturing into it? But how did you, I guess, transition into becoming a regular?
The grand final team, I did play in that grand final, the reserve grand final. There was a whole heap of guys that had come through in the 19s, and we'd made a run the previous year in the under 19s. We played a certain amount of games in the. I can't remember when I went the first senior game, and we played a heap in the twos. We couldn't play too many because then we couldn't go back and play 19. So we played right up to the limit. Went back, qualified for the finals in the 19s, or we might have just missed out on percentage or something, and so then we come through in 87, had a really good year. And it was primarily a group of young kids, and we'd beaten Carlton 3 times during the year leading up to that grand final. They got us in the grand final. They had Sheldon played, Silvani played. They had a lot of talent coming through and a lot of older players dropping back. And I think they got us by about 3 and a bit goals that day. But I had a really good year at that level. But to be honest, I still wasn't ready for senior footy. I remember I played one of those night games. We played Essendon, might even have been at the start of 87. And a guy, Stephen Carey, played at Essendon, a real nuggety defender. And I was 71 kilos, skinny kid. And I gave away for a kick. I pushed him in the back. And he had these eyes. He looked up, and I remember I apologised to him. I pushed him in the back, and I said sorry, and I thought, I've still got a way to go here. So the following year, the 88 year was the first year. I had to win Doc over. Doc wasn't initially. I don't think he was sold on me as a player, so I had to win him over, and eventually I did. And once I had his trust, he was really good for me, actually. In a different way to a lot of the other coaches, but that was the beginning. And the kids that come through these days, they're a bit older, they're a bit more trained up. I'm still a kid from North Dandenong, really trying to find my way, and it took me quite a while to feel like I belonged at that level. And so that 88 was probably the first time that I actually would go out every week and actually feel like I was part of the team and contributing. So in 89, I think I played every game the following year. So, they were good years, actually. 88, 89 were good years for me, personally.
I was going to say that throughout your career, I mean, you played for 11 years, I think, across the journey, and a lot of those years were kind of cruel by injury, but it was those 2 years, at 88, 89, that were kind of your best, both in terms of kind of getting out in the park and playing games, but also statistically. And you mentioned Doc and that kind of coach-player relationship, but what was it about Doc that kind of got you up and about? What was that relationship like?
Initially, it was tough going, and Doc was old school, so he had some. He was a hard taskmaster. I mean, you guys would remember what Moorabbin used to be like back in the day. There was not much grass on it, and we do 2-hour sessions on a Thursday night, 2-on-2, and looking back, I can sort of see what he was trying to do, but also, we get to Saturday and we were pretty spent, to be honest. But he started to give me play me more through the midfield, which I guess is more of what I enjoyed and what I'd grown up doing. And he was. I probably thought at the time he was pretty old school in his ways, but he understood the game. And a perfect example, there was a game we played Sydney. It's a pretty famous game because Greg Williams had 53 and kicked 6, I think. And I played on him that day. And
that's a decent effort.
Well, it's incredible effort, isn't it? And it's a funny story in a way. And it's a lesson for me that unfortunately I had to go through that to learn. But at half time, we were sort of going head to head, and I played on Greg quite a bit. And I was going okay, and we were in the game. And then the first 10 minutes of the third quarter, I reckon I had 6 or 7 touches, and the runner kept coming out to Greg and telling him that he was moving forward. And I'm a young kid, I'm thinking, hey, how good's this? I've got him. And he kept telling the runner to nick off, and he wouldn't budge. And Frankie Coughlin, who was a really good mate of mine at the time, we're at Sydney, and that loud music's blaring in between goals, and we're right in the game. And Frankie said to me at the stoppage, he said, hey, you keep going, I've got him. And 10 minutes later, he kicked 4 goals. And it was on me because I'd sort of kept doing my own thing and lost my way a little bit, got ahead of myself probably. And, in the end, he has 53 and he kicked 6, and they won pretty comfortably. And Frankie and I talk about that when we catch up quite a bit. And Doc was hard on me, and at the time I couldn't see it. And Alan Davis sort of talked me through it during the week, and he was quite right. I had a role to do, and I stepped away from what I was doing, and I got burnt. So he was a really good. He understood the game, and it took me a while to appreciate that. And he certainly gave me the opportunity to make a small little mark at senior footy.
Just a quick interject. You had 34 yourself that day, so by any reckoning, that's not a bad afternoon.
Oh, yeah. Look, surprise, he got the 3 on Brownlow night. I got 2, but no one remembers my game, do they? He's had 53 and kicked 6.
I was about to say it's not a bad effort to have someone get 53 on you, kick 6, and you still got Brownlow 8. So it's not a bad effort. You wouldn't get a look in the next week as a tagger these days like that. The other part of sort of from what you were saying there, I was going to ask the position you sort of found, I guess, your niche in. You were described as was the key word back in that period as the utility. It was just it's a position that's just completely vanished these days. Where did you find you were, I guess, most comfortable on field and felt like, yep, this is my position. I'm set in this spot. This is where I want to be on the field when we run out there.
So the most comfortable was probably 91, 92, the back end of both years, when we had. It was pretty much myself playing in the centre, Harvey playing ruck rover, and Burke playing as rover, and then we'd change in and out. Every time I'd go back and play, Peter Francis might have been the coach, and then Barks was coach of the twos for a period, and I think we might have had Gary Colling was coach of the twos for a little while as well. And I'd go back and I'd play centre all the time, and as I come up, Greg Burns was our centreman, and we'd play intra-club games, and I'd walk away, at the time as a young fella, I'd had a pretty good day, but Burns is going at half speed and doing what he needed to because he was a veteran and he didn't really need to do much in those practice games. So, I mean, the answer to your question was I was more comfortable playing as a centreman, as an old school centreman. Forward, for me was when you got Loewe and Lockett, it sounds easy, but it's I found that difficult. And when Sheldon coached, I actually played a couple of games across the halfback flank as well, which was interesting. I remember playing on Wanganeen when he played for Essendon one day, and went okay, and then the next week no good. So I was certainly more comfortable playing as a centre player, ruck rover, sort of predominantly forward of centre, I guess, as opposed to pushing too far back in defence.
Obviously, in 1990, late in the year, you played a couple of games forward and kicked 5 against Fitzroy and Essendon in the last game, the game where all the Danaher's played. At 91, you missed a fair bit of footy. We'll touch on the injuries a bit later, but 92, you're back into the year, as you spoke about. You had 30 in the last round when we beat Melbourne to make the finals, and then you had 27 and kicked 2 in the elimination final against Collingwood. Is that, if you look over your career, is 75,000 at Waverley, elimination final against Collingwood, you kick a couple, you set up the sealer as well in the last quarter. Is that the standout moment from a playing point of view, that you played a big game in a really big game for the club? It was the first final St Kilda had won in nearly 20 years. Yeah,
definitely, Darren. Look, I was disappointed in 91 that I didn't. This is work. Sorry, guys. That I didn't play in 91. Ken and I have spoken numerous times since then at various catch-ups, and I thought I was going as well as I ever have in 91. Ken chose a couple of other guys to play. I played in the twos in the Geelong final in 91, and we had a big win, and I went really well. And I sat in the stand thinking, well, I'll play the following week, and we had a couple. Burke got knocked out, Granny got knocked out, Spud did his Achilles, and we got beat by a goal. I think it was 7 points or something by Geelong. So we missed out. So 92 certainly was the biggest game. I think the Collingwood game at the MCG, I think I missed with injury. So I missed that one, which was obviously a huge game when we beat them by a point, I think. So that final, it was amazing. And I reckon I've seen that game since on tape numerous times, and I reckon it stands up. It's if you go back and look at it, it's a really high quality game of footy, and it's really enjoyable to watch. And I caught up with a few of the boys not long ago, Jason Daniels and Burke and Shanners, and it's a really proud game to have played in. The following week we played Footscray, howling wind. We kicked into it in the first quarter. Chris Grant kicked 4 goals, I think, the first 15 minutes, and we just couldn't peg them back. But that year, I think we'd beaten all the sides that eventually played off. West Coast, Geelong, we'd beaten Collingwood, Hawthorn. We'd beaten them all in the back end of that year pretty comfortably, and we were pretty confident that we go all right. Our Achilles heel was the wind. Lockett kicked 5, I think, in that final against Footscray, but he wasn't his best in the wind. And Loewe, a great mate of mine, but God, when the wind blew, I knew we were in trouble with Loewe. So I Ken knew that too. So I think we got beat by 20-odd points or something that day. But the Collingwood game was amazing. Yeah, it was a really good memory for me.
You talk about that game standing up. I think most St Kilda fans that kind of grew up in that period or were already kind of established as Saints fans watching that 91-92 period kind of all agree that 91-92 team stands up as one of our best teams ever. Obviously, before that, we've kind of spoken about where the club was at before that and kind of the mid to late 80s already. But what was it that changed heading into that 91 year? Was it just pure force of talent? You look at those names coming through and getting more games into the likes of Harves and Burke and Stewart Loewe and Nicky Winmar and those types of guys. What was it that kind of brought that team about?
Yeah, to a degree, and a fair percentage was the development of players, but the appointment of Sheldon was critical. Ken was he's a pretty wild child. Ken was a player, and and it was. I'd imagine it would have been difficult for him going from player to coach, but what he did was he instilled. I think what it was that was required to be a competitor, a really competitive team, and look, a couple of times he probably tipped over. We played a practice game at Subiaco, no, at the Wacker, I think it was, against the Eagles, and it was we got beat. We come back and. We instruction was we drive straight back from the airport to Moorabbin, and we had a 2-hour training session running the stairs. Like the sports science guys would go crazy these days, straight off the plane. And but at the same time, we had a couple of other Sunday mornings after a loss where we'd turn up. We thought we were going to get punished, and it was more a common sense approach, and we chatted it through, and we had a few beers, and but Ken was primarily the one. He was the one that turned the club around, I think.
Oh, yeah, we've talked about 89, 90, 89, 91, 92, but 93 yourself, statistically, you look at 93, and that was for the games he played, a huge season. He only ended up playing 9 matches, but in that time picked up 8 Brownlow votes. So extend that out into the season, you look at that and you think, well, you've probably played a lot better than a lot of the, I guess, high-end players in that season. Do you feel like when you were playing that year, you'd really found your, I guess, form? And is it just looking back now going, you wish you had a full year that year to really, really dig in and give what you had those few games?
Yeah, I had again, Ken and I have had conversations over a couple of years about this, and I went through a patch at 91, 92, 93. I thought I was playing my best footy, and my body was okay, albeit I had some issues. I had a couple of operations at the end of the year, and struggled for a little while to get back up. And I knew. Probably not as much as I know now, but I knew at the time that for me to compete at that level, I really needed to be 100%. And if I was, they talk about guys who can play with injuries. I was never that good to be able to do that. So I had to have everything right, feeling good and be able to run. And I had some injuries, and I started to get some tendonitis through top of my hamstrings, and had one of them operated on, and just a couple of other things that just didn't allow me to free up at training to get in the condition that was required to play consistent footy week after week. So I certainly had some games in 93 where I was up and going, but I wasn't physically able to do it for long enough in 93. 91, 92, I was. At the end of the day, I thought it was opportunity that cost me in 91, 92. But 93, there were some other issues that I had that I battled through. And that then led in 94. I did the knee in 94, and really probably looking back, the rehab that I did was whilst it was great at the time, it probably wasn't the best rehab for me. And speed wasn't necessarily my forte, but once I got back from the knee, I had no speed, really. I was just too big up top, nothing through the legs, and no core, or not strong enough through the core, and that's what I should have been doing in my rehab. But, it's easy to say that in 2021, looking back, but I thought I was doing the right thing at the time, and clearly I wasn't. So,
final one for me, and obviously the injuries. I mean, you played 80 for the club and probably left at least another 80 out there with injuries as well. But that last year at Fitzroy, obviously you spoke about growing up as a Fitzroy supporter. What was it like going to a club that I think the writing was on the wall to a degree at the end of 95, as sad as it was, I think, for everybody? We spoke to Jason Heatley, who couple of years earlier, he'd been on the books at Fitzroy before he went to West Coast and ended up at St Kilda, and he spoke about the challenges. I mean, the Saints weren't a powerhouse, but what was it like going from a club like St Kilda, who were struggling to a degree, to a club that was effectively, for want of a better expression, on death's door in 96?
I'd actually retired, to be honest, Darren. I remember going in and speaking to Stan about 1996, and I'd really struggled. That the tendonitis, I had it in the other hamstring. The knees weren't great. Pretty much from the waist down, I was really struggling, and I couldn't do the training to the level that was required. And I had a couple of mates, Kane Taylor and a few other mates I'd grown up with were at Springvale, and I remember going into Stan and I said, look, mate, before you start talking, I think I'm done. So I'd actually retired, to be honest, and was pretty much ready to go down and start playing footy at Springvale. Ricky Nixon was my manager at the time, and I was working with Luke Beveridge. Bevo and I worked together for about 10 years. And Ricky rang me at one point and he said, you're not going to believe this. There's 2 clubs are actually interested in having a chat to you. And I was staggered. I really thought I was done. So one was Footscray, one was Fitzroy. So I met with both. And Fitzroy offered a 2-year deal. We sort of knew that it was going to be a bit of a challenge, but it was sort of last chance to learn sort of stuff. Give it a go. I'd spoken with Michael Noonan. I was coaching Fitzroy at the time. He pretty much gave me, because I was living back with mates in North Dandenong, and he pretty much gave me up until Christmas to do my own thing, which was attractive. So I did some stuff in the gym, and I went down to Fitzroy, and you're right, it was almost, you go back to St Kilda back in the late 80s, it was almost below that, unfortunately, just given had some great people, some really talented players, but the infrastructure and it was just hard work, playing games, I think, at the Western Oval, training at Coburg, competing with Coburg Footy Club. Ground had just been redone, so they drain marks going across. It was really, really hard work. Eye opener with the colour. It's where I got introduced to Martin Pike. Pike was an interesting character.
We've heard that a few times, actually.
Some amazing things. I just was blown away by some of the stuff that went on. And then I had the issues with the tendonitis flared again. We played a practice game, I think, in Fremantle, and it flared up again. It really hindered me. So I was in and out. I missed a lot of games. Then I had the opportunity to go and get the operation, which would have put a line through me. I had a chat with Ricky, and I thought, no, look, I'll give it another go. And in the end, I probably played okay in the back end of that year to get back in. But they were, and I fully understood, they were pretty keen to play a lot of the guys that had been around for a while, knowing that it was all done. So it was a bit of a grind. And I'll be honest with you, when Brisbane took over, I wasn't sure I had that second year in me anyway, to be honest. Yeah, that was an experience in itself, having these Sunday morning meetings at Coburg with Brisbane people basically telling us how they're going to take the joint over, and they're going to pick certain players, and Pike would roll in halfway through the meeting with a coffee and in the same clothes that he went out in the night before. It was quite entertaining, but it was a bit sad because I was a Fitzroy supporter as a kid. But once the AFL make up their mind, it's pretty hard to fight against that.
Mick, last one for me, and it's a bit of a two-parter. One's a little bit lighthearted and one's a bit more serious, but we'll start with the lighthearted one. But you probably look younger now than you did back when you were playing.
Yeah.
Do you remember any good sledges or anything that you copped either from opposition players, supporters, or our own fans out in the animal enclosure?
Oh, mate, I heard some crackers. Fortunately, I'm very thick-skinned, so nothing worried me. There was one game, I reckon we were playing North Melbourne on a Friday night, and I don't even know who it was, but I was going in to kick for goal, and someone was yelling out, calling me pube head. And I thought, that's funny, that's not too bad. A whole heap of stuff come from over the fence. some of the funnier moments in footy were listening to some of the, it was always the start of the second quarter and the start of the third quarter. Everything just went a bit quieter, and you could hear a lot more stuff that was coming over the fence. So yeah, you're right. COVID hasn't been kind, unfortunately, and I've got some pretty bad knees, so the exercise has dropped considerably in the last 10 years. I'm hoping to fix that next year and finally get a couple of knees replaced. But it was some. I always had a laugh, mate. I didn't take anything too personally, I can promise you. I couldn't afford to, could I?
No, that's good. I guess the second part of the question, and like I said, a little bit more serious, but you played almost the majority or the entirety of your career, the majority at least, under the captaincy of Danny Frawley.
Yep.
What are your memories of Spud, and what's one thing that you kind of take away as his legacy at St Kilda?
The main thing about Danny was whenever we caught up, I always left that catch up feeling better for having been there. It was always such a great time. I mean, he was a very emotional man, but he was a class clown. That's why he did what he did on the bounce, and he did it so well. A hard leader, like really tough leader, but I was fortunate enough to back in the day, back when I was a kid, I used to do the clinics. I used to do the rounds with Danny and Gary Lyon. So we'd hop in a car and we'd go away for a weekend. And I think I was 16, 17. I'm doing these clinics with Gary Lyon and Danny Frawley. So I got to know him really well. Went to his wedding with Anita, and felt part of the Frawley crew. So, and I knew he was struggling. He was doing a bit of work for me. Spud, I organised him to deliver I worked for Cedar College, and he was about to do a speech to one of our regional, so probably 100, 120 kids, 2 weeks before the incident on mental health. And he messaged me to say he couldn't do it. And, I didn't think anything of it at the time. And then Shannon's actually rang me to tell me what had happened. And I'd heard about it in the morning, and I just didn't put 2 and 2 together. And look, I was angry. I was angry with him. But, an amazing captain, super bloke, very entertaining, and, miss him dearly.
Just finally, what I guess seems appropriate was your final game actually ended up being against St Kilda.
It was.
Are you happy that it finished like that, or being the Fitzroy supporter, do you think you would have liked to have played that final game over in Perth, or are you sort of happy that looking at that from the outside?
There's a couple of things, multifaceted this answer, because I'd booked it. I flew to Europe on the Thursday after that game. I had it all booked. I actually, Loewe and his wife at the time, we were catching up in Germany. So my mind was sort of, I'd sort of tuned out. I thought I deserved to play in the last couple of games, but understood why I didn't. And I was actually playing okay. So when I knew we were playing St Kilda, I got played on Rocket. Rocket Keogh, who I'd played on when he was at Melbourne, and got to know him really well when he comes to Kilda. And I played on him. And I was playing okay at the time, and we had a win. I think we won that one. I think Fitzroy won that game, to be honest.
The win that year was against Freo.
No, that reserve game, that last game.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, no, that last other game was no good. That was terrible. Last 2 were no good. I mean, it was, it's one of those things. I'm pretty much a realist, so I understood where I was, and sentimentality was great. Good to play with some mates who I knew, but I knew I was done. So it was probably a nice touch to end up playing against St Kilda, albeit at reserve level. But yeah, and then the other one was obviously to play in the last win that Fitzroy had against Freo, albeit at Whitten Oval in front of 550 people, but it was a great win. So I can hang my hat on that anyway.
Mick, thank you very much. Good luck with everything going forward. Appreciate you sharing the story. I think a lot of Saints fans have some great memories of your footy. I remember, a lot of my early video memories of footy were 91, 92, and yeah, that final always stands out in my mind, the elimination final at Waverley from 92. But well done on the contribution, and thanks for stopping by.
No problem, guys. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, mate.